In this presentation, we'll be talking about Kennedy and the Cold War, and this kind of corresponds with Chapter 38 in your textbook. Just a quick reminder that all the images within this presentation are in the public domain. Try to go through this fairly quickly. There's a lot of videos that are available, and we'll be watching those in class or making links available on the worksheets. So just a reminder, this is Kennedy in the 1960s, and it does correspond with Chapter 38 in your textbook. Don't hesitate to give me a call or an email if you have any questions. Thank you. So as the Eisenhower administration comes to an end, there's an election. The election occurs then between Kennedy and Eisenhower's vice president, Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon chooses Henry Cabot Lodge as his vice presidential candidate. Lyndon Johnson is chosen as Kennedy's vice presidential candidate. This is a very close election, but Kennedy wins. This is the first election in which the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution takes place, making sure that Eisenhower is not eligible to run for his third term. And Kennedy is then the first presidential candidate since Al Smith in 1928 that was Catholic, and he becomes the first Catholic president. So in the election of 1960, it was very close. Kennedy defeated Nixon by fewer than 120,000 popular votes. The electoral victory was more clear-cut, but several key states in which the election was very close, key states of Missouri, Illinois, and Nevada, could have swung the election in favor of Nixon. So these are just a couple of graphics. The other thing that is mentioned in your textbook is that television was very important. Remember that Eisenhower was the first presidential candidate to use television with a commercial, but this is the first presidential race in which there's a live presidential debate. And Nixon was criticized for being a little bit underprepared, and Kennedy came on the scene as being a legitimate presidential candidate when before the debates people had questions. So I would encourage you to take a look on YouTube, just a couple of video clips about the first presidential debate between Nixon and Kennedy. A couple of key points of Kennedy's foreign policy: we have the Peace Corps established, and then also this Alliance for Progress, economic aid to Latin America, billions of dollars to participating countries. But Kennedy's administration is overall kind of shadowed by Cuba. In Cuba, we have in 1959 Fidel Castro taking over. Fidel Castro overthrows Batista and ushers in an era of communism in Cuba. And so the first attempts to overthrow Castro occurs in this Bay of Pigs invasion, and this occurs, we can go into detail later or in class, but this Bay of Pigs invasion is a failed and botched invasion. It happens very early on in Kennedy's administration, but it gives Castro what he considers a legitimate reason to go to the Soviet Union and go to Khrushchev and ask for military support, and so Khrushchev then initiates this bringing in missiles. So again, we're looking at January 8, 1959. This is very early on in Kennedy's administration, and Castro takes over. The army rolls into Havana. It's actually even towards the end of Eisenhower's administration. Friction with the United States develops, and the United States is urged to get rid of this ruler, Castro, who has come in. And then this is, of course, the friendly picture of Castro and his good buddy now, the leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev. And so Nikita Khrushchev comes in eventually after the Bay of Pigs invasion. Khrushchev comes in by sneaking these missiles into Cuba. Khrushchev is very happy to bring missiles in to help his buddy Fidel Castro and to limit the power of the United States. This then leads to 13 days in October, the missiles of October, in this conflict between Cuba and the United States, or the conflict between Cuba and the Soviet Union and the United States. And 13 Days is a decent video, a decent movie that you could watch. Focuses on this 13 days in October and the tensions that existed between the United States and the Soviet Union to get rid of these missiles. These missiles are discovered by a U-2 plane, flies over Cuba and takes photographs, and so you can see here these photographs of the missiles. Missiles are discovered. They are considered by experts in the CIA or analysts in the CIA, they are considered to be not operational, but there's construction sites in which they will become operational in approximately 13 days. So you have 13 days, the administration has 13 days to decide what to do. The Soviet Union has to remove them. If they are not removed in 13 days, the United States will go in. If the United States goes into Cuba militarily, it could risk World War III. And these are more photographs of the missiles and the installation sites. These are all taken highly top secret, highly sensitive photographs taken from the U-2 flights. So one of the things that Kennedy does is he puts together a group where he asks them to come up with a possible solution. This group is famously known as the ExComm, or the Executive Committee. We have, of course, the President, Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense, but we also have the Attorney General, his brother, Kennedy's brother, Robert Kennedy, and others. Lyndon Johnson is there as well. So this is the famous ExComm, this Executive Committee, and the CIA officials that are monitoring Soviet arms buildup in Cuba, they reveal that the island has these ballistic missile launching pads, and so the demand is made that the Soviets must remove the missiles. First thing that is suggested is a quarantine of the island. Make sure that no additional missiles are brought in, and so there's a standoff in the Caribbean between the Soviet ships and the United States ships, and eventually the Soviets turn around. Secretary of State Dean Rusk makes a famous quote, "I think the other fellow blinked when we were eyeball to eyeball." But this is more U-2 flights are ordered, and this is a famous picture here of the military coming in. This is General LeMay from World War II, and the other military advisors coming in, and in some cases arguing with the President that more military action is necessary. Of course, Kennedy is placed in a difficult position where if more military action is required and escalation does occur, we're dealing with totally different scenarios here with nuclear missiles. Is the end of the world in sight? And World War III is not necessarily an option with the Soviet Union, with a nation that has nuclear missiles. These are a few photographs from Time magazine of the blockade. These are Soviet ships. You can even see the missiles on board, and this is the United States plane. So this is a blockade. This is actually, these are photographs of the missiles being removed after the conflict, but you can see what the blockade must have been like with cargo ships, missiles on board, and the United States military. So the conflict definitely had high tensions. President Kennedy does invoke the power of the United Nations, and there's a definite confrontation between the United States and Soviet Union in the United Nations. This is our ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson, demonstrating these or showing these satellite or U-2 photographs to the United Nations, showing that the Soviet Union has put these missiles in the island. So the United Nations does condemn the Soviet Union and say this is unacceptable, and this leads then to a potential diplomatic settlement. And if you have a chance, I would encourage you to watch the chapter in the video documentary, The Fog of War, and look at the chapter in which Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense at the time, reminisces about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he is quite adamant in saying that the world was very close to mutual annihilation, and that the war was almost fought. But missiles were removed, and the Kennedy administration felt pretty good about the outcome at the end. But it's just kind of scary to think about how close the world was to having a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union as a result of this Cuban Missile Crisis, these 13 days in October. So this is a very famous photograph of the two brothers, Kennedy and Jack, shortly after the missile crisis, and kind of contemplating the gravity of the situation. The results, ultimately the nuclear test ban treaty was put into place, and then a hotline, a direct link between the leaders of the Soviet Union and the President of the United States. These two countries needed to be able to communicate directly. The two leaders, the two people with the finger on the button for nuclear annihilation, needed to be able to pick up a phone and call, and to kind of circumvent all of the politics and all of the other people involved. That was a clear problem in the initial Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev could not communicate directly with each other. So that kind of concludes one of the most tension-filled moments of the Kennedy administration. And then we're going to move on to a couple other things. Kennedy's assassination then is also another very popular thing to look at for U.S. history students. You look at November 22nd, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby then shoots Lee Harvey Oswald, and then this whole Judge Warren, the Supreme Court Chief Justice, with the Warren Commission, kind of trying to put to rest any thought or any suspicion of conspiracy. So there's video that you can watch on YouTube. I also want to call your attention to a video that is on your chapter 38 and 39 homework assignment, in which it looks at the actual assassination. The link is there. Please follow that. But this is a famous photograph of Jacqueline Kennedy and the other Kennedy brothers. This is Robert Kennedy, and then this is the Senator Kennedy, and the two children, John and Caroline. And then we also have the casket. So as Kennedy then is no longer in office, Johnson is sworn in. Johnson becomes president, and Johnson then has to deal with Vietnam. He initially wants to introduce his war on poverty, but this war, it kind of takes second place to the war in Vietnam. But we want to look at that in a different presentation. So that concludes a very short presentation just over Kennedy. This is it goes along with chapter 38 in your textbook. Again, the images within this presentation are in the public domain. Please do not hesitate to give me an email or a call if you have any questions. Thank you.